This is Natasha Helfer, and I wanted to just give you a few updates that are happening at Symmetry Counseling and in my practice in the coming months. I will be holding my first ketamine group session on January 25th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. in our Holiday, Utah office, with the theme being reclaiming female sexuality. There's 15 spots available, so I know that they'll go quickly, so make sure you call to register. We are super excited to be using ketamine at Symmetry. It's an extremely helpful medicine in helping people with stuck thinking patterns. So this is where so many people benefit from, either past trauma or past education, past sex negative messaging, lots of things that you can feel stuck on and you want to kind of redirect and re-explore your body, your preferences, your identity, your joy, your pleasure, right? And we want to get old thinking unstuck. So super excited to be offering this. It will be kind of a uniquely guided experience I'm going to curate for you to feel safe and to be able to explore a lot of these themes that we're going to be talking about. If you are a current client of mine or past client of mine, I'm offering an additional 10% off the early bird or regular price, depending on when you sign up. You have until December 15th to still benefit from the early bird rate. Yeah, just call the office for information and you will be able to get registered for that. Other groups, I'm starting in January. So my pretty popular Navigating Ethical Non-Monogamy group is going to be starting on January 17th on Fridays from noon to 1:30 Mountain Time. You can join these anywhere in the world as long as it works with your time difference changes. And it will be 7 weeks long, and it is for either couples or individuals who are interested in potentially starting non-monogamy in their lives, or maybe have already been in the lifestyle but are wanting to either get better at certain aspects of it, learn how to deal with challenges in more effective ways. I will also be doing a healing from male sexual shame group starting on January 30th. This will be on Thursdays from noon to 1:30, again, Mountain Time, again, online. So you can join me from anywhere. And this group is kind of for people who identify as male and either come from purity culture, sex negative thinking, and potentially also were treated under the sex addiction narrative and ways that has hurt them from considering themselves just on the spectrum of human diversity versus diseased or sick or something along those lines. So that's also a very popular group, and I encourage you to sign up for that if you haven't. I also have one of my providers, Sarah Rands. She's going to be offering a group on dating and kind of the typical challenges of dating as an adult. It's meant for any gender, any sexual orientation, and that will be a 6-week also online group. So if you're interested in that as well, call the office at Symmetry Counseling. And I also want to let people know that we have 2 current interns at our practice who are taking on new clients, as well as some of our more established providers. So we do have openings at Symmetry Counseling. I know sometimes people have a hard time finding a therapist with openings. And we work with all the general things as well, of course, the specific intersection and expertise on religion, mental health, and sexuality. So that's a little bit about us, and hope you're having a great day. Please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel or also offering a donation to keep this podcast alive. And thank you so much for listening.
Welcome to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. This podcast addresses many topics around mental health and sexuality. It may not be suitable for minors. Some topics may elicit a trigger or emotional response, so please care for yourself accordingly. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes is by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
Hello, everyone. This is Natasha Helfer of the Natasha Helfer Podcast. So glad to have you with us today. I'm very excited to introduce our guest and the book that she's written. But before I do that, just a really quick reminder that we have some upcoming groups and events happening at Symmetry Counseling at the beginning of the year. We've got an ethical non-monogamy group starting. We've got a male sexual shame group starting, and we're going to have a ketamine group for about 15 women who want to do any type of sexual healing work. It's called Reclaiming Female Sexuality. So it'll be with that intention. So if you're interested in any of those things, make sure you give Symmetry Counseling a call or look up on the website and we can get you more information or registered for those events. Yeah, I think that's all the announcements I have. So without further ado, I have with me today Juliane Taylor Shore. She likes to go by Jules, but that's her official name. She is coming to us from Austin, Texas. She's the author of a book called Setting Boundaries That Stick. And what's interesting about that book, I think more than the title, is the subtitle, at least for me. Probably people are bored by subtitles. I'm like, what's this really about? And she writes how neurobiology can help you rewire your brain to feel safe, connected, and empowered. So that caught my attention even more than the boundaries, although that's super important topic and we need as many boundary books out there as possible. But
yes, please.
To think about it kind of from this neurobiology space, I hadn't really heard of boundaries being talked about through that kind of lens. So I'm super excited to talk to you, Jules.
I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Super cool. And I guess I'll say a little bit more about you, but then I want you to introduce yourself. I think it's much better when people introduce themselves, but you specialize in applying interpersonal neurobiology to healing of trauma, creating relational health with clients. You use your knowledge of the brain and the implicit mind to go decisively to the root of the issue with gentleness and depth. You've been a specialist in trauma recovery and in couples counseling for 12 years. You have quite a bit of experience behind you, but I would love to hear more about you from you. What got you into this? Why are you excited about this? How did this develop? How did you get interested in writing this book, right? So let's just start with your intro being informative.
Oh, I love it. Well, I got into therapy like many of us get into counseling through my own work. I ended up in a counselor's office. I argued with him that feelings were dumb and that we didn't need them. And I didn't know what he was talking about. And he stuck with me anyway. And a couple years in, back then I was turning wrenches for a living, actually. So I'm an auto mechanic during the day. I go to see this therapist basically out of desperation. I was in a hard space in my own life. And 2 years later, walking out going, you know what? I think I want your job. How do I get it?
Wow. Okay.
Right? And then I went to grad school and I got really interested in neurobiology and specifically in interpersonal neurobiology because we didn't have any classes on the brain in my grad school program. So I went to grad school a little bit ago. So '06 was when I was doing my grad work. And back then, and it may be changing a little bit now, but there wasn't really any in-depth neuroscience-y sort of neurobiology thinking as part of my coursework, which I thought was super weird because I wouldn't ask one of my guys to fix a brake system if they don't know how a brake system works.
Yeah.
So I just felt really confusing. Oh, you want me to be with people's minds, but you don't want me to know anything about their brains? And that led me into an investigation that turned into an almost obsessive level special interest of neurobiology. And then I found eventually I followed different folks and started studying it on the side. And then eventually I found Dan Siegel's work and studied with him in LA for a little bit.
Okay.
And then I went into deep study with Bonnie Badenoch, who also has written for the Interpersonal Neurobiology series. And she's a great mentor of mine. She's like, well, my heart. And so I followed her work and I still geek out on it. I read neuroscience articles like every day.
Wow.
Super weird, but there we are.
Yeah. You're an MFT by trade, right? American Family Therapies. And me too. And you're right. We didn't get a whole lot in neuro brain kind of basic brain understanding, but it was really more about familial patterns and
Right.
cultural patterns, but not so much what's actually happening. And
Totally. And all that feels so important. All the cultural space and the larger, like how are our minds being formed from these family patterns and what's being carried down and all that matters a
yeah,
ton.
yeah,
And the neurobiology does too. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
So that's how I got into it. And then I ended up writing a boundaries book. Well, really, I was helping clients. I wasn't setting out to do boundaries. I was setting out to help clients face hard realities together.
Mm,
Sometimes in couple work, sometimes in small group. So, like, I could separate out a direct request from a boundary when we face that you have influence over other people but no control.
mm,
So you can ask them for something to be different. And then if it's still not okay with you, you might do something on your side to take care
right.
of yourself well in the face of something that isn't changing even though you've asked. Oh, that's the difference between a direct request where I ask you to do something and a boundary where I say I'm going to do something to add to
Mm.
my own safety and well-being.
Yeah,
Right.
which I definitely want to delve into all that a little deeper because
Mm-hmm.
that was a big part of the first part of your book.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important language for people to understand for sure. How did you like, but sticking with the
Yeah,
neurobiology
yeah.
a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah.
longer
Do it.
to understand, like, how did you think, okay, neurobiology can help us understand boundaries work, right? So before we start understanding what boundaries are, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
how did you connect those two, and what do you want if you had just a few bullet points that you wanted people to understand?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so neurobiology and boundaries have everything to do with each other. Well, let me say it even broader than that. Everything about your mind is inextricably intertwined with your neurobiology. Even though I would say that who you are, mind, soul, is not your brain,
Mm-hmm.
I do not believe that's true. I think we can have a separation
Mm-hmm.
between mind and brain, and I'm happy to talk about that. And the organ that is creating this thing is your brain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That these experiences that you're having every day are being processed through the nervous system. So, not even just your brain, but body wide nervous system.
Right.
So, there's nothing in mental health that I think goes unconnected in
Yes.
some way to our neurobiology. And specifically with how it relates to boundary work is around how our brains respond differently depending on how much integration we have at any given moment. So let me break that down for a second. So integration just means, oh, different systems are operating and cross-connected. So the more they're independently operating and talking to each other, we'd say high integration. The more they're operating independently and not cross-talking, we'd say less integration.
Okay.
So think about it like this. Your brain is processing on a spectrum of integrative states. And sometimes it may be less, and sometimes it may be more. And you'd be
Mm-hmm.
flowing back and forth along the spectrum every day, all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of my folks, what they're wanting is stuff on the more integrated end, even though there's nothing wrong with the less integrated end. Less integrated ends are great for when you need to move quickly, right? So if you need to move fast, like there was a moment when my kiddo fell off the bed on vacation when she was a baby. I caught her in midair. How did I even do that?
Mm-hmm.
I was in a less integrated state. I grabbed first and felt about that later, and then I realized what was going on.
Right.
Thank goodness. There's nothing wrong with that state. And if my husband's coming to me with something that maybe even I disagree with him with, if I enter that less integrated state, oh, I'm not going to be able to connect and bond with him and wrestle through this difference with him. in a
Right.
way where I stay in my integrity very well because I'm going to become more reactive rather than responsive and slower. So the
Right.
good news about the more integrated state is it's a little bit slower.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore can do things like grief processing, creative thinking, curiosity, connection and bonding behaviors. So a lot of my clients are looking for stuff on the more integrated end. So I was looking at, well, what is it that the brain is actually doing to assess where on the spectrum to end up?
Right.
It's making an assessment of how safe you are 4 times a second. I'm going to say that again so nobody misheard me. Your brain is assessing how safe you are and therefore how integrated or less integrated to be 4 times every single second. So, like, while I said that last sentence, like a couple hundred,
We've been doing it all the
you've
time.
already been doing it, right?
Mhm.
And when the brain assesses increased safety, it moves towards more integration. Oh, well, there's something that can help our brains perceive more safety if we increased our own self trust and our ability to do boundary work. Because
Mm.
boundary work is all about increasing protection and increasing safety
Right.
and feeling more empowered and like I can trust myself. And when I can trust myself to handle even hard things, then I feel more safe in the world.
Mm.
And so I'm going to have faster responses that are all these quick responses like, oh, I can handle this hard thing. And now even though the hard thing didn't change, it changed in how I processed how safe I am.
Mm.
Does that make sense so far?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it started there, and then I was thinking, well, I was helping my clients just face hard realities like we could look at the same thing and we could think and feel different stuff about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Yeah.
If I depend on you thinking and feeling the same as me for me to be safe in connection with you, we are in trouble.
We're in trouble.
Right?
Yes. Right.
Oh my gosh.
It's like the basis of any marriage counseling.
Totally. Totally. So, oh no, I need a way to increase my safety
Mm-hmm.
while accepting the differences between us. Well, the mentalization neural network is in charge of that stuff. So, what if we put the boundary inside the mentalization neural network? And now we can work at fast brain speed to increase boundary work and help your brain move slower.
Okay.
So all of this ended up intertwining because all of the processes that I'm interested in, like I'm a big how person. I love all the whys and I love all the hopes. And really, in the end, I go, yeah, but how?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a great idea not to take stuff personally. How?
Right.
Like, I love the plan. That
Mm-hmm.
sounds like a good plan, but I don't understand how I get from where I am to that.
Yes. Right.
I'm a big how person. And a big how person who's interested in neurobiology means that I'm really interested in helping you work with the brain you have
Mm.
rather than try to thwart it or move around it or do some work around. I'm like, actually, your mentalization network's already guessing what's happening in the other person. And it speaks imagery. So we could create an image practice that you can now use to increase safety while you accept differentiation between you and another person.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's how they kind of wove together, and each each boundary type I'm working with in the book, I'm looking at, well, what are the different parts of your brain? What are the different systems that may be part of this boundary, and how do we work with them to support them, supporting you even better?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I
Hmm.
do think that that's something I've thought about a lot too in my practice is we give a lot of good suggestions, a lot of good visualizations, a lot of good
Hmm.
ideas, like even
Hmm.
the word differentiation. I use that word all the time. We're going to increase your skills of differentiation, but how?
But
Are you
how?
going to do that?
But
How
how?
are you going to become less enmeshed? How are we going to
Right.
heal and not have the same trigger response that we've been having for 10 years.
Totally. How are we going to do this? Well, we're going to change the brain through skill, practice, state, and trait. So skill, brand new thing you learn. Practice, that means I'm going to repeat the new skill many, many times over a 3-week period, and that's going to hone a neural network. Then I'm going to keep activating that neural network on purpose, and my brain's going to start doing its association magic. So your brain is an organ that does association really well, and it's going to start associating, oh, this new skill I'm learning and practicing feels really important. How does it feel really important? Because Jules keeps practicing it 3 times a day. So I guess it's important now. And then it's going to start going, well, you know where that skill would be handy is over here. Oh, and over here. Oh, and over here. And so the more you utilize it after that 3-week period, it stays in state form, meaning I access it on purpose, but it starts to integrate its way into different times when it would be helpful. And that takes about 2 years, 3 sometimes. So everybody breathe. I know that's a hard number. Right? So 3 weeks to hone a neural network, a good 2 to 3 years of using it regularly. And when you do that, what'll happen is it'll move into trait form. And trait form means it's now habitual, a normal part of how you experience the world. And that doesn't mean you can't go back to an old way, but it's relatively rare. And if you needed to re-access that new skill, it would be fine. And mostly it just happens as habit.
So the 4 things were skill, practice, what was the third one? State, and then habit
Trait.
or trait.
Yeah, so it's become a trait. So now this is just part of your personality and how you move through the world.
Yeah, right. So I agree with you on the 2 to 3 years, and I just want to give a positive reframe for people who are listening.
Do it.
Because I tell my people this all the time.
Yes. I
know
love this.
we've been working at this for like a year and a half. I see us probably working on this for about another year. So, how do I sell them? I'm like, this is a good idea. I'm like, you came in here with a history of this issue being around for 20 to 40 years, depending on what age you are and how long you're dealing with this thing. Isn't it amazing that we have the capacity to rewire something sustainably and long-term in a 1/10 of that time?
Yes, it is amazing. And I love that reframe. I say yes to it. Especially, I don't know, I'm a bit of American mutt. I've moved around a lot as a kid, but I moved in the States. And as a person who grew up in the States, part of the context I carry with me is fast, now. It should all be magically done. And so those parts of me grieve when I hear the 2-3 years number, and then I'm with you. I fall into this like fountain of hope, like internally, like I can feel my body shifting as you're saying that. Like, it's true, we can do this in just a 1/10 of the time. That's amazing.
I think we are resilient, amazing creatures. So
yes.
It is good, but it does take work. I oftentimes also kind of give the metaphor. I love the skill and practice thing. In fact, I talk about giving yourself a pep talk with permission, education, and practice. I have practice as my third little thing there. And I talk about the metaphor of like learning a new instrument, right? None of us are going to pick up a new instrument and sound amazing usually on day one. Some of us give up because we try for a few weeks and it still sounds horrible. So we don't have the wherewithal to keep going and keep pushing on something that doesn't seem to be giving us a lot of fruit. But boy, when you stick to it, you can become pretty good at something new.
Yeah.
To the point that we might pay you and go to see your concert.
Right.
You're that good.
Exactly. Oh.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, well, let's dive into, yes, you talked about, because I think this is really important language. We talked about this quickly before you came on, but most of the people that listen to me, I think, have a history, either are currently or come from what I would call a high demand system, usually a religion. And so one of the things we talk about if you're coming from that kind of a space, and it doesn't have to be even religion, it can be culture. Like my mother's from Argentina. Latin culture is very enmeshed and communal, and there's lots of wonderful things about that, and there's some struggles with that, just like any system has its pros and cons. So one of the struggles is that we don't tend to be very good at boundaries, because it's kind of this idea that you should exist really for the system, right? Like you're part of this community, and in order to not be considered disloyal or disrespectful or not a good team player, you should kind of get along and go along. So we kind of struggle with saying, hey mom, or hey bishop, or hey spouse, I'm not sure I want to be quite this enmeshed. That doesn't mean I don't love you, but this is not feeling that healthy to me.
Right.
So I think this language is important. So let's start with and I wrote it down when I was reading the book. Making a request versus placing a boundary versus placing a demand versus placing a complaint. So these were 4 words that I brought up, and you were kind of already going there. So let's go there.
Yes, I love it. Well, usually what we are taught to do is to complain and demand. So complain meaning, rather than asking you to shift something in a direct way where I ask you to give me something different in your behavior, right? I complain about the behavior that's not working, hoping you will read my mind. That's usually the hope, right? We're going to hope you're going to read my mind. I'm going to complain sideways and passively if I don't want to rile you, right?
Give me an example of both. Give me an example of how you would think of a complaint versus if somebody was asking for a request.
Right. So a complaint would be, I can't believe you never helped me put my kid to bed. A direct request would be, it would be so great, honey, if sometimes you did bedtime. Could we switch this up so that I'm doing 3 nights and you're doing 3 nights sometimes? What are we going to do here? Yeah. That's a request, right?
Okay.
And so it could look really passive, like instead of saying words, I could have my husband's name is Adam. Adam could say, it's time to put the kid to bed. And that's my job in our house. And I go, oh, that's a subtle complaint, right? Or I could go, it's always me. Subtle complaint. Or I could go, can you do it tonight? Request. Right. Okay. So what we usually do, what we've been taught to do, is to, well, do nothing and just say yes and build up enormous amounts of resentment. Or if we're tired of that, right? Or if we're tired of that, what we're going to do is then we're going to complain, sometimes very subtly, sometimes bigger, and then we're going to demand, you have to put her to bed tonight, right? Versus boundary, right? And so boundary is not about what somebody else is going to do. A boundary is about what I'm going to do to take care of myself, increase my safety, increase my well-being, not about what you're going to do, right? So if, I can't do a boundary that's going to make him put the kid to bed. What I can do is say later on when he wants to connect, right? I could say, actually, I really want to talk about what our parenting balance is prior to any other kind of connection. Because this is feeling so out of balance for me, love. I just don't feel available to talk to you about the emotional connection. Let's talk about this first. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So in a way, I think what people might be missing sometimes is that they're going straight from a complaint to a boundary, and they're missing the opportunity to ask for a direct request.
Right. And I tell folks who come to my workshops, well, a direct request is something that you're going to ask for, and a boundary is something that you're going to do. You don't have to be dependent on anyone else to go ahead and do this thing. Yeah.
Right. Right. Because, well, we'll get into the types of boundaries here in a minute, but you can be an external boundary you talk about is communicated. Internal boundaries are more just decisions you're making within yourself, regardless of what anybody knows or doesn't know about you.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Boundaries feel confusing to talk about, I think, because I think we're using one word for lots of different stuff. People
Yeah.
say, like, oh, let's not be enmeshed. Why don't you increase your differentiation, increase your boundary? And we're not being, wait, what does that mean? Right? So I broke down boundaries into 4 different categories because I thought we weren't being really as clear as I was hoping about what is it we mean. And so a lot of times what people are talking about when they use the word boundary is what I would call external boundary. But there are internal boundaries as well.
Right. Do you want to go over the 4 categories really quickly?
Oh, sure. We've got our external boundary. That's a boundary I'm setting between me and another person. We've got internal boundary type 1. That's a psychological boundary. That's the space between our minds so that I can be safe, even though our minds are different. You've got your containing boundary. That's where you're going to put a pause between what you feel and what you do. This allows you to have more space in which to make sure your actions are fitting your own value system. I find that especially helpful for people who are in a space of discovery around value system transformation. So I have lots of clients who've come in and they've gotten their value system from their family, or they've gotten their value system from a church space or from a cultural space that now they're recognizing that actually, I don't know if I personally align with 100% of the value systems that I've been passed down. I find the containing boundary work particularly helpful for folks who are in that, ooh, who am I? What are my values as separate from what I got taught my values ought to be?
Yeah.
Because what'll happen when we're in that space of wondering about who I am, it can get to a time where it feels like, oh no, I'm betraying my true self because I keep falling into the old way. Like I keep acting as if this old value system that I think I'm trying to leave behind is still true. And then I get into all this like wrestling and beating myself up a bit around, oh no, why am I doing that? Well, one, you're doing that because your brain learned to do that and learned how there's nothing wrong with you. That's how it works. And 2, there is work you can do to support yourself in giving yourself enough of a pause so you can move from reactivity to responsiveness.
Yeah.
So it's the containing boundary is really a pause between you and you, where you put a pause between what my instinct is to do, what my feeling might drive me to do, and the action I'm actually going to take so that I can double check it. And that way it can have a better likelihood that it's going to be closer to the value system I'm aiming for. And then there's the physical boundary, which has everything to do with our physical bodies. Some of that, I think of this as a crossover boundary between internal and external. So the internal side is often around repair. So many of us have had some sort of physical violation in some way. So sometimes that boundary work is around between you and really working with the body to feel where you are in time and space right now and offer care to the physical injury you may have sustained. If that is like real physical injury, like broken bones, which sometimes some of us have, but it may be more like, oh, I wasn't bruised, but I was deeply injured. And so really offering care and boundary repair and coming into the now in the body as well as the mind is some of that internal boundary work. And then the other piece of the internal boundary work I think of is just getting to know you. What is right for me in terms of space, in terms of physical contact in this moment? what's right for my sexual health, what's right for my physical health, what's right for my psychological well-being when it comes to how close I want people to be to me physically, right? And then once we know, oh, this kind of touch feels good to me, this kind of touch doesn't feel good to me, then we can actually say it out loud. That's when now we're moving into direct request plus external boundary. So I'm thinking back to when my husband and I were first married, and he is a toucher who moves when he's touching. So he might put his hand on my leg, right, and go like this. Okay, everything in me goes like this when somebody touches me. It could be him, it could be anybody. It does not matter who it is. Everything in me cannot handle it. And I come from a long history of don't say anything, let it go, right? So it took a lot for me to work up the courage even to name, oh, this kind of touch doesn't feel good, but it's not that I don't want you to touch me. I just want you to stop moving, right? But even to communicate that for me years ago was a real struggle. Even to know what is it that's the problem? What is it that I actually want? What can I request? Oh, when that request doesn't go well, what kind of boundary will I need? And eventually, all of that came together to one, when it wasn't happening, tell him what had been happening on the inside. And out of that conversation, make a direct request. Oh, when you touch, can you keep your hand still?
Yeah.
And initially that conversation went like sometimes it can, which was, oh, you don't want me to touch you? No, 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 that's not what I'm saying.
Right. Right.
Right? So we had to negotiate that. And now if he touches me and moves, I put my hand on top of his hand and wink at him, which is my boundary, right? The boundary is something I do. And then he goes, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, I forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's getting, sorry?
Negotiate. It sounds like you've negotiated all of that. Like he knows what to expect,
Yes.
what it means, you know
Yes.
what it means, and then you can go
Yes.
forward from there. Right.
Exactly. So I had to communicate all those things and then in the moment really do it rather than doing the old thing, which would have been to just let it keep going.
Right. Right. So that is a good example of like a physical boundary,
Mm-hmm.
an external boundary, and
Mm-hmm.
also aspects of it were an internal boundary.
That's right.
I think the only thing I didn't hear in there was a container boundary. So do you want
Oh
to get?
no, absolutely. I was doing a containing boundary
Oh, well, let me. Yeah.
because my normal way in the old way would be to let it go and not speak. So I had to use my containing boundary, which is a gesture plus two value words, a gesture that reminds you of compassion plus two value words you come up with. So I can put my hand on my heart. That's my containing boundary gesture. I put my hand on my heart and I go, courage, kindness. And then I remember to go, oh, hun, remember? And I put my hand on his hand because normally speaking up would be something I wouldn't do.
Mhm.
So I had to use my containing boundary to put a pause between the feeling and the doing so that silence would not be the doing.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And the psychological boundary has to be there so that if he's, oh no, you don't want me to touch you anymore, I don't become reactive to that.
Mhm.
I can go, oh no, that's not what it is. I I don't know why this happens to me, hon, but it's freaking me out. Right?
Right,
Ah,
right. No, that's really,
mhm,
that's really good. And I think sometimes the way I talk about internal boundaries too is just from a sense of safety. Not always are your feelings, like you can't always say the things that you want to
mhm,
say and feel safe about them. I'm thinking in particular, like my queer clients who maybe are dealing with traditional families and are
mhm.
going to family Thanksgiving, it's coming up
Right.
here. And so they're like, well, I know that I may come across some jokes or verbiage or things that are not affirming. And
Yes.
I've tried many times to talk about this. It's not going to go well. So my internal boundary is on the third moment that I feel upset, that's when I'm going to make an excuse and say, oh, I've got to go home. And
Yeah.
so they created like an internal decision that's not really being communicated, but that they know
Totally fine.
for their safety is what they need.
That's right. Yeah. And I don't think we always have to communicate our external boundary. Our external boundary might be communicated.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
In that situation, actually, it's not going to help you that much to communicate it ahead of time. Just go ahead and do it.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I also see this one more thing I want to talk about, see what
Mm-hmm.
you have to say about it. I see this a
Yeah.
lot in couples, marriage couples,
Mm-hmm.
especially being a sex therapist, in the realm of psychology, right? So like people oftentimes feel like I'm entitled to know what you're thinking and what you're fantasizing about and
Mm-hmm.
what you're turned on by. And so a lot of times couples come in feeling like I have no privacy even in my own brain. Like I'm just either I'm required to share all of this or I'm considered a liar. And so I do think
Oof.
a lot of people do lie, quote unquote, in that type of, negotiation because they're like, I don't want to tell you every single thought I have.
Mm-hmm.
And that wouldn't even be safe for our
Yeah.
relationship. Anyway, any thoughts about that dilemma?
That is a really intense dilemma. And here's what I would say,
Yeah.
is one, I am big, big, big advocate for freedom. And part of that freedom is to choose what you share with who.
Mhm.
And I believe in your autonomy and your freedom and your choice. And so I want to support you in using your containing boundary to choose not to answer a question if that's what's right for you.
Mhm.
Right. So it may be you have an automatic, oh, well, I was asked a question, so I have to answer. You don't.
Yeah.
You don't. Yeah. And if you're one of those folks who is struggling with that, who wants to know everything your partner is experiencing, right? One thing I would say is you could do some work on your psychological boundary. And on the inside of that, get really, really curious about right now you're trying to increase your safety by knowing all.
Mhm.
What would happen if you increased your safety a different way?
Mhm.
And so when we're doing psychological boundary work, that work has two parts. One is what somebody's thinking. Is it true? Is it about me? We can have some discernment about whether or not we take it in all the way into our hearts, or whether we know, oh, I'm witnessing something going on with you. I'm not witnessing something going on with me. I'm witnessing something going on with you, right? That's
Mhm.
part of it. And that helps you increase safety between your mind and somebody else's mind. But the other piece of it is you increase safety between your mind and somebody else's mind from your end. So, what happens if you stop psychologically invading?
Mm.
So, part of this is what I call listening with acceptance. And I could just know, oh my gosh, I'm not going to know a ton of stuff that's going on over there. I won't actually know all the details. Can I trust that needing that right now is my partner becoming themselves through time? And I actually don't need to know in order to increase my well being. And then you're probably going to start making up a lot of stuff about what secretly is behind there. Go ahead and put those thoughts on the other side of the boundary and then ask yourself, true or not true, about me, not about me.
Mm.
If they're not true, they're not about you. Let them go. You don't even know what's happening in there, so you could be making stuff up. But don't worry, your mentalization neural network already believes you that the stuff you made up is true about them. So put it on the other side of the psychological boundary and put a pause between knowing that might be happening and taking it in and believing it all the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really good. I appreciate you talking through both of those sides of that scenario. I think it's something a lot of people struggle with, and especially when you're married, you feel like you owe each other almost everything, but
Mm-hmm.
and oftentimes what's sad about that is I see that interfering with intimacy instead of enhancing
Mm-hmm.
intimacy, right? So I think
Right.
able to tolerate those differences or the not knowings, and
Right.
the overall process is really what's going to increase intimacy.
Yeah, I tell my couples, we're gonna work on hanging out in the hammock of not knowing.
It's like, oh, that sounds like a lot of fun, Jules.
Exactly. I say, well, it will be because mystery actually increases seeking behavior. So in the end,
Right.
having some mystery between you is going to increase interest, is going to increase curiosity, is going to increase longing, right?
Right.
So you're actually doing your sex life and your romantic partnership a really big favor by letting some things remain unknown.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Reminder for sure. Thank you. Okay, so let's go back to what we were talking about, which I want to just repeat again because I think
Hmm.
even though it's simple, I think it's very important. Is
Yes.
that, when something's going awry and you're noticing it,
Hmm.
you can start off by either making a request, or I think how you're using the word complaint is that it's coming across in kind of like a whiny, indirect way, instead
Hmm.
of a request being like, hey, this is what's
Yes.
happening for me. This is what I'm experiencing on my end. This is what I would like to have happen differently. Would you be willing, okay with that, not willing,
Hmm.
like just being very direct.
Yes.
And then with what comes from that, is then either a boundary or a demand, right? Because if
Hmm.
if that person says yes and they're willing to change, usually that goes well. That's great. We're on
Great.
the same page.
Isn't that fun?
Not
Yeah.
fun when that happens. But then somebody might say, no, I'm not willing to do that. I'm not willing to bathe the child tonight, right? Or
Right.
take on 3 times a night, or share that responsibility with you, or
Right.
whatever it is. And so then at that point, a person can become demanding, like, well, you have to, or
Hmm.
place a boundary, because then it's like, well, since I realize I can't control you, what can I do on my end instead? Yes.
Right. That
So
is correct. You've got it.
this is all
100%.
the language, right?
Yes.
Requests versus complaints, boundaries versus demands.
Yeah.
So then and I think we'll have time for this. And then, I'll be like, everybody read the book because it's really good. So we don't have to give everybody
Oh,
the book. But you talk about kind of 6 steps to
yes.
kind of just starting boundary work. And so I
Right.
thought maybe we could go down that path, and
I
then,
love that. I
yeah.
love that because I'm a how person. Oh, great, Jules. You want me to set this boundary? How in the heck am I supposed to have that come out of my mouth and then be okay with whatever happens next? So here's how. This is 6 steps to setting external boundaries, and it all happens away from the situation before. So it's all about prep. Once you get really good at your prep, you can do it in real time. But my recommendation in the beginning is this is all about preparation. So you want to exit the situation and really start thinking about it in a new way. So here's my suggestion, and I'll list them all, and then I'll do a little bit on them. So you're going to find your big why. You're going to define an action. You're going to anticipate what's going to happen on the other end. You're going to anticipate your response to what's going to happen on the other end. You're going to create a soothing plan. You're going to stick to your boundary. 6 steps. Okay, so big why. You need a big why because boundary setting is hard. You're about to do a thing that's going to actually create more difficulty than if you didn't do the thing in the moment. And what's funny about your brain is that it guesses hard now as worse than hard later, no matter if it's true or not. And so to say yes to hard now, I need a big oomphy yes to balance it out. So think about it like scales, like this Lady Justice with her scales. You want those scales balanced. If they are not balanced, you will not do the thing. So, for example, let's say I'm in a situation where I'm always putting the kid to bed. The resentment I might build over 5 or 10 years, that's way worse than the pain that would happen if I said something now.
Right.
But
Which
my
is
brain doesn't think.
I know it's so hard to remember that,
No,
right? Because
here's the thing. My
we're
brain doesn't think.
avoiding pain. We're avoiding pain in the here and now.
That is your brain's job.
By creating more pain later.
Yes, exactly. And here's the thing, is your brain will not agree with you. Even though you could have that thought and really get it, your brain will never agree in the moment that this is a good idea to create pain now. It won't do it. Don't worry. We're going to create a really good yes. So what I need is a really good reason to say yes to the hard thing right this second. So that's your first step, is you're going to create a really oomphy, like emotionally potent, heck yeah, I'm ready to do a hard thing.
I love it.
Yep. And then the second thing we're going to do is we're going to really get, okay, what is it that's going on here that's so hard? And to find my action, what am I willing to do? Because the hard thing is not stopping. So in your example of the situation over Thanksgiving, and at the third joke, I'm out, right? So defining, oh, I'm willing to leave as this continues. If this becomes really painful to me, there's a threshold at which I'm going to say yes to leaving. That's the action I'm willing to do, right?
Yeah.
And if I want to communicate that to somebody, then I might come up with a short way to say it.
Mhm.
So it might go, here's what's going on that's okay. Here's what's not so great about what's happening. Here's what I'm going to do when the not great thing happens to take care of myself.
Right.
And that's it. And a lot of times, what I see folks do is try to explain a lot about why the boundary makes so much sense, as if you were going to convince the other person to agree with you. They
Yep.
won't. You can let it go now. Here's the thing, we both are wanting something different in this moment. They're not going to stop wanting it. I'll,
Yep.
I'll tell you, I have a favorite boundary book, but it's not mine. My favorite boundary book in the entire world is a children's book written
Mhm.
by Mo Willems called
Okay.
Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus.
Don't let the pigeon drive the bus.
Yes,
Okay.
I love it because it gives you great practice at handling when the other guy becomes the pigeon. So the pigeon book, this Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus. It's just a kid's book, and the bus driver says, "Hey kid, can you watch the bus while I'm gone? I got to take a break. By the way, don't let the pigeon drive the bus." And you turn the page and the pigeon's like, "Hey, can I drive the bus?" And then you're supposed to say no, and the pigeon is the pigeon.
Right.
And the pigeon is the pigeon. Of course, the pigeon is the pigeon. And he goes, "But your mom would let me. But my cousin can drive a bus. Come on, it's just 5 minutes. What if I paid you $5? Right?" And eventually, screaming escalation. "Why won't you let me drive the bus?"
Right.
Right? What happens if we know that, of course, the other person's going to do some version of pigeoning?
Mm.
Because we all do. Because our brain is trying to help us get more of what we want.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
doesn't mean, I mean, if it's repeated and repeated and repeated, I'll go with you. They're not respecting your boundary anymore. But mostly, I don't even worry about whether or not people are respecting boundaries. I worry about, are you sticking to yours? Because a boundary is not about getting the other person to do something. A boundary is about what you do to increase your safety and well being,
Right.
right? So that's why we do step three. I anticipate what the other person's going to do. So let's say I'm going to leave my family's home. Oh, okay. Well, I hope you have a great rest of the night. I'm going to go ahead and go. And I'm going to guess my mom is going to grab my wrist and say, "What are you doing? Why are you leaving?"
Mm.
Right? That's a guessing about a reaction. I'm going to guess my dad is going to roll his eyes and go,
Mhm.
right? I'm going to guess my sister is going to go, "Can't you stay?" Right? So I might guess what are these reactions going to be when I set this boundary? And it doesn't mean you're right. We don't have to lock into them, but we're going to guess so that you can get to step four. Can you can you worry a little bit about what your emotional response is going to be when they do the thing?
Right. Right.
Because they're going to do the thing. Okay, now what? And we guess at those because I want you to have a soothing plan, which may actually in the end be your containing boundary work. Often that happens where eventually somebody uses their containing boundary But we want a little kindness towards your feelings. Of course, that's hard when mom grabs your wrist and says that. Of course, you're mad. Of course, you felt guilty. Of course, you got scared. Whatever it is that your response is. A little bit of courseness between you, and a little bit of kindness, right?
Goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, good. And then
Yeah.
so you anticipate it, you create a soothing plan. So you kind of decide, what am I going to do or say to
In
myself?
the moment. And then 6, I'm going to do the thing anyway. So how am I going to support myself doing the thing?
I'm not going to be talked out of the thing
That's
by
right.
all responses that are probably going to come my way.
That's right. That's right. And in order to do that, I have to take care of me really well in the moment. So those are the 6 steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really good. It's really important. And I really like that idea of giving, well, of expecting that people are not going to respond well to boundaries work often because of that initial idea that we want different things. So
Yeah.
let's have a reaction. And I talk a little bit about cyclical safety, meaning like, can we be safe not only to place our request or our boundary or idea,
Mm,
and then can that other person be safe enough to have their reaction, which may not
right.
always be ideal because they're dealing with their own disappointment or feelings, or
Exactly.
and we can go back and forth being safe enough until hopefully there's a bit of a resolution,
That's right.
soothing or something like that. So,
Exactly.
okay, so what would you have to say? I know that, like you mentioned, Brene Brown, she's
Mhm.
really good about talking about, boundaries are kind.
Mhm.
The fact that Brene Brown has to say that means that we all think they're mean.
That's true. We so do.
So what would be Jules' kind of take or framings on how do we really understand that these
Mm.
things that we're doing are not because people are being mean or picky or drama queens,
Mhm.
whatever the things are that people say or do when people try to place a boundary?
Mhm. I would say that we all learned that because in many spaces, community well-being has been defined as same as
Mm.
instead of defined as belonging through difference.
That's beautifully stated. Say that again if you can. A lot of people,
Oh gosh.
I know people tell me to say things again. I'm like,
I was
well, I
in
was
flow state when that happened. I don't know.
brilliant for a moment. I can't be brilliant again.
Right? It was some version of, I think there are lots of spaces where we got taught that community safety was going to be created through same as rather than through belonging through differences with our differences intact.
Yeah.
And so when you've grown up in that landscape, you learned same as is dangerous and bad and a betrayal. You were taught it was mean.
Different is
Oh,
all of
yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's what I meant. So anytime I don't match same as, that's exactly what I meant. Thank you. So if I don't match same as, that means I'm betraying the community, I'm dangerous to other people, I've violated our safety rules.
yes.
So all of those feelings are going to stir in me.
Yeah.
And that's not our fault. Fact is, we just never grew up in a space where, oh, you having a different feeling than me was fine.
Yeah.
Or you having a different need than me was fine. Like what I think about a moment where I did a boundary with my own kiddo. She was young, 3, 4 maybe, and grandpa really wanted a hug. And she really didn't want a hug right then. And I could feel her like kind of like moving into placating, fawning sort of move. She wasn't in super danger or anything, but she could tell he wanted that. And I could feel her like fighting with her own little system,
Mhm.
right? And I put my hand out and said, Stell, it's totally fine. And I looked over and I said, it's okay if Stella doesn't want a hug right now. And the response was unpleasant
Mm.
on the other end, right? Because we grew up in spaces where if an elder male wants a hug, then you should give a hug. That's respectful, right? And so me having that difference, celebrating that difference, saying it's okay for her not to want what you want, and we can all take care of ourselves well, and that's going to be all right. Me acting as if that were true violated that norm, right? But I do wonder, oh, what what differences is she going to grow up with what her body knows is okay
Yeah.
versus what I grew up knowing is okay?
Yeah. By having a mom who would advocate for that difference to be okay.
Right, right. So I know I was taught it was not okay to not give somebody in that position what they wanted,
Right.
right? So I do wonder, like, what's her internal psychological landscape going to be like? And I don't know yet. She's only 10. We'll find out. I'll tell you in 30 years how it went.
I love it. I'll call you.
Right? But if we're going to be supporting ourselves and our kids in making these differences, I don't think we're being mean. I think we're being clear. And I think even if it hurts right now, me letting you know, advocating for myself, and letting you go through the little pain is going to be so much kinder than if I wait until I cannot stand it and end up exiting our relationship, even because I couldn't do that earlier, right? And sometimes we have to exit the relationship anyway. I'm totally get that. I support you if that's where you are, right? And I guess I wonder, do sometimes we say yes to more pain because we delay the pain?
Mhm.
And is it kinder to say yes to the smaller pain that's going to happen if I say yes to difference?
Right.
Especially if I grew up in a space where difference was not okay.
Right. Right. It's a whole new practicing, which goes back to the neurobiology we kind of started out with.
Yes.
Is, I think, and I'm not as well versed in neuroscience as I'm sure
Mhm.
you are, so you can correct me, but my understanding is that first and foremost, neurobiology is interested in survival
That is correct.
and surviving.
Surviving. And I want to add to that, if that's okay. Yes, 100%. Neurobiology is interested in surviving, and part of how we, as an interdependent species who is unable to feed and care for ourselves early, survive, is to hold on deeply to primary attachments,
Yes.
even if they are painful, even
Yes.
if they are hurting me.
Because we depend on them.
Yeah.
We die on them.
Yep,
Yes.
which is why sometimes we can end up with our bodies, in our bodies, we can have it like a push-pull because everything in me from an attachment perspective knows I need you to survive. And everything from a body safety perspective says, ooh, move away. And then I'll end up in a struggle in my own system because the survival instincts that are both accurate are fighting with each other a little bit.
And why surviving is very different than thriving, because
Oh,
thriving really is more the capacity of what you're talking about, being able to get into these better resilient spaces and better integration.
right.
Survival oftentimes will pick the lowest denominator of what's healthy for
Totally.
you.
Of course, you've gotta, because the check mark at the end of the day isn't how great I did, it's am I dead? We're not dead. If the answer is not dead, then check,
And we're
got it.
doing great,
Then we're
right?
doing great.
So there's a whole nother system that's worried about quality of life.
That's right. That's when we have enough safety where when I think about thriving, here's what I think about. I think about, oh, if we're in thriving space, we've created spaces if it's possible for us to do that. Not it isn't possible for everybody depending on your social location,
Yes.
right? But if it's possible to create enough safety, you'll spend a lot more time on the integrated side and you have increased flexibility along the spectrum. So it's easy to move back and forth along less integrated, more integrated. So when I'm working with folks, which I do frequently, who maybe are in a space where actually a less integrated state is wiser more of the time, because of where you are in the context of your marriage, in your social community, whatever's going on for you. Great, no problem. Can you increase flexibility so when you are in a space that's safer, you catch up fast and can create that more restful space for your brain?
Right.
Yeah. So that's when I think, what does thriving look like? I think it's like, ability to flex along the spectrum.
Right. As
Yeah.
needed. And
Yeah.
in ways that actually reflect actual safety concerns. Because
Reality.
you're talking about it, I'm thinking of my OCD clients and my PTSD clients. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes those things are skewed by our mental health conditions, right? That
That's
ability.
right.
Yeah. So
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
I know we're kind of nearing the end of our time, which makes me
Yeah.
time because I could talk to you for hours. But is there anything I'm not asking you that you're like, oh my gosh, I really wanted to make this point and she didn't even ask me about?
Oh my gosh, no, I can't think of anything. It's just so delightful to be with you and to think about these things.
Yeah.
Ooh, I don't know. I had a thought.
Okay.
When it's like a teaser for boundary work. So it's a story. I just want to tell a story. So I was working with this person who was working on containing boundary, and this person came up with a gesture like this for their containing boundary gesture. And we use a gesture because that matches a fast part of your brain. And so it's going to be easier to access if we have a gesture that has an emotional meaning. So this person they came up with this gesture, and they came up with some keywords, and they kept practicing and practicing and practicing. 3-4 weeks, practicing, and then kept thinking about how often it would have been helpful later in the day. And they were in the car with their partner, and their partner said something, and everything in them wanted to say a thing. And they looked down, and their hand was doing this.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
And they went, oh, it's changing. And there was like this moment of really getting. So I guess my message for you is brain change is going to happen anyway. How much influence do you want over yours? And there are practices you can put in place that will help. You help that flow of your river as you flow through time change in directions that are supporting you.
What a beautiful story. I love hearing that. And I hope that gives people hope because these things do take practice and they're feasible. And we all have neurobiology. We all have neuroscience. We all have plasticity. We all have it. So
Right. Don't worry, your brain is on your side.
it is not impossible by any
Yeah.
means.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful story. How can people reach you, contact you? What do you want to say about your book and where it's available? Like what? Yeah.
Yeah.
Moment to let us know how we access Jules.
Oh, thanks. Well, you can access me through my website, julianetaylorshore.com. And the book is called Setting Boundaries That Stick. And it's available wherever you like to buy books. If you like smaller local bookstores, they've got it. If you like Amazon or Target, they've got it. Well, wherever books are sold, you can find it. And it's available in paperback, audio, and ebook. So we're trying to make it accessible to folks. And then if you want to come and do any kind of workshop with me or anything like that, you can find out that on my website. I'd be happy to have you.
Yeah. And you do like intensive retreats for couples, is that
I
correct?
do. So I do intensives for couples. I do boundary workshops for couples. I do boundary workshops for individuals. All of them are really small group. And then I have one-on-one intensives as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So either with an individual or a single couple. And then we do 20 hours of work together.
Okay. Well, good to
Yeah.
know. Make sure and put that all in the show notes and the links and everything like that. So when people hear this, if they want to reach you, it's easy to find you.
Oh,
Jules,
great.
thank you so much for your time and your expertise and all this work that you've done for the benefit of all of us. So
Oh,
Yeah, it was
Thank
lovely.
you.
I really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, I did too. And I thank you so, so much for having me on. And thanks everyone for your time because that's such a precious commodity. So I appreciate you hanging with us.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Take care. Good night.
Thank you for listening to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes are by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
There is a place where time slows to nature's pace, and there is space there to find yourself in her embrace. Some places should be left alone. Na tishki say the Navajo, so we can always go to the homeland of the heart. 10,000 years of our human history etched on her canyon walls, alongside Earth's mysteries. Some places should be left alone. No tishki say the Navajo, so we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart. Deep in our cities, we sleep without her stars, yet still her presence sustains us from afar. Some places should be left alone. No tishki say the Navajo, so we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart.